And what this means is that China may be growing at a slower rate, but it is now a much bigger share of the global economy. And so its contribution to the global economy is still going to be significant. And
if Chinese reforms spur even more growth in China, then that will have mostly positive spillover effects to the rest of the world as well.
And if China is successful with that, it will do well for itself and will also help the world.
And what this means is that China may be growing at a slower rate, but it is now a much bigger share of the global economy. And so its contribution to the global economy is still going to be significant. And the contribution of Chinese growth to global growth will still be a high proportion. And so that is the central forecast. That's what you expect to see happening, is that a continuation of the trend that we've been seeing. And so what we're looking at the moment is an environment where we have to be worried about the state of global growth generally. But Chinese growth, I tend to be a little bit more optimistic.
If you take a look at the growth we've had for the last 20 years, China has been very important for the global growth, both because of its own very rapid growth and indirectly by its contribution to what other countries have benefited from that growth, for example, developing countries. To put it in some numbers, even a bigger time period, between 1980 and 2015, China's share of global GDP went from 2% to 17%. That is the biggest increase in the shortest time of any country in the world. So that's part of why global growth was so high. To the extent that China is successful on implementing reforms and can keep its growth rate high, 6.5 or more, as the President has said, it will still contribute very much to global growth. And the sources of growth for China are going to have to be much more in terms of innovation across the whole economy, agriculture, services, manufacturing. And if China is successful with that, it will do well for itself and will also help the world.
China's reforms will be hugely important, not just for China, especially for China, but for the rest of the world. China for some years has been the driver of global growth. It is the biggest country, obviously, in every metric imaginable. And so if Chinese reforms spur even more growth in China, then that will have mostly positive spillover effects to the rest of the world as well.
China's growth has been very important for global economic growth, increasingly in the last, let's say, 2 decades. China has grown from having about 2% of global GDP, of having 17–80% of global GDP. So any percentage of growth in China is contributing to global growth. But still, the structural change in China, which also means, for example, relocation of lower value-added industries to other countries, will influence the regional economy, the global economy, by Chinese investments, by Chinese capital exports. China is still a capital exporting country and will remain so for the foreseeable future. And this will influence the global economy. So it's not only the volume of growth which is important. It's also the question of the structural change in China and its impact particularly on the region.
China is trying to aim for a new normal, as China has already officially stated, which means that it wants to bring more quality in its economic growth rather than just a number, and maybe even shift from just being an export-oriented economy more towards a consumption-led economy. What that would mean is that the value chain and the manufacturing and the industry within China is going to change. It will also require that there is more value-added industry, maybe even some services-related industries that are being hosted now in China. So if China shifts towards a consumption-led economy and a services-led economy, it will require a different framework to engage with the world. We need a different kind of agreement, not just a free trade agreement in goods. We need free trade agreement in services, movement of professionals, more ability for other countries to set up offices here and to bring in people and for moving capital and money. And so there's many touch points that China's shift will have with the rest of the world.